Hi, I'm Mr. Miyagi, and this is Mr. Miyagi's Workshop. Stay tuned for the next episode of Parked When Ran. No, when ran, when parked. You know, you'll get it. Well, at this point, I think we're going to go ahead and install the shift drum. We're going to put a little lubricant on the shaft that goes into the case there. So what we're going to do here is we're going to put on number 3. You can see there's a little indication there, a little stamp. Number 3 slides on. Number 2 right there. Slides on. And we also have the followers that are already inside here. I just want to point that out, that I've got them already stuffed in there. So all I have to do is push them down and put the cotter pins in. So number 1 is now going on in place. And you got to line this up a little bit. Hopefully it'll go in fairly easy. There it goes. Okay. So now that we've got this all in place, we need to put the followers in. So basically, let me grab my little tool here. Basically what we're going to do is we're going to put these guys in so that they follow, the followers go into the following groove. And what we can do right now too is like we put a little lubricant on there and there and there. Give it a spin. There we go. So these are just going to push down into place. Hopefully. Now we get a little better. Okay, that one's in. So the cotter pin goes in. And what we're going to want to do here is we're going to want to bend these in such a manner as that they wrap the fork. And this gets to be somewhat a little tedious. There we go. Boy, that's tough on the fingers. There it is. And at this stage, I like to use the channel locks just to kind of get that in place. Adjust them a little bit here. So now basically that cotter pin is wrapped that around that fork follower edge. This one, let's put a little lubricant on this one, in the groove, in there, and in there. All right. On this one, you want to make sure that the cotter pin is coming in from the number 3 side. After you get your locator in. And be right back. These work pretty good for doing this stuff here. So basically all these cotter pins do is they hold the following pin, the fork pin, in place. And one of the reasons why we go this way is that if you have the head of that sticking out, it'll bump against the number one shifting fork there, and it won't allow it to go properly into gear. Just take your time, don't get in a hurry. This basically isn't rocket science, but there we go. And can I get in there with these? I don't remember. Okay, one side goes on. And the next side, I may end up having to use the narrow ones here. Yeah, that brake tool worked pretty good. I should say at this time too is that when I had this apart, I was double checking the forks to make sure that there wasn't any wear on these areas here, and in the shifting grooves of the gears themselves. Okay, well, moving on to number one shift fork. A little appliance there, a little there. Everybody gets up. Yeah. It just shoves down in there. So that's in. Cotter pin. Removing these cotter pins and stuff out of this area when you're disassembling it, it's much easier to have the guide bar removed, and I'll show you how to install that here in just a second. Let me get this back around. And there. Okay, so now we're going to insert the guide for the shifting forks. Should go right in here. You want to make sure that this little notch is pointing towards the front of the motor, because you're going to turn it a little bit to lock it into its locking mechanism. And you can also see, you can also see on here, these are the oilers for oiling the fork slides. And that just goes right in there. You just work it a little bit, and if everything is done properly, it should just slide into place. Now we're going to rotate this up, and we're going to install the stops, the shifting stop, and the fork guide lock. So the fork guide lock goes on first here. What it does is this flat edge right here meets that little notch area that I was talking about. So we just get that kind of lined up here. All right, now we want to lift the drum a little bit here until all this kind of just slides together. There it goes. All righty. All right, put the locking tab down for the bolts. Hold that keeper in place, and that is an 8mm. Okay, the drum stop wants to go in. We have to, the longer part of the spring goes towards the clip area, and you just got to kind of work it down in there. There it goes. Then that inserts into that slot on the drum there. And then we have a stepped screw right here that fits down in here that goes to the case. That is a 12mm head on there. And what we need to do is we need to make sure that it slides into that stops little area there. It's a little wider. So this thing has a pivot point. You definitely want to be able to move that. There. Let's torque these down. And the 8s. So now we want to bend these tabs up so that these don't back out. There we go. That's set in place. Let's check the drum shifting. Looks pretty good. Now at this time we can also put in the detent right here, which we have. That's your neutral detent. That just slides into a little hole right in there. A spring goes in there, pushes down, and the outside nut. What that'll help do is that helps lock it into neutral. I believe that that was neutral. Yep. Okay. I need to torque that down. 22. There we go. So the shifting mechanism and everything now is locked into place. Transmission parts can go in. So we can set those up right now, but I think I'm going to hold off a little bit on doing that because I want to put the backbone on, and then we can also drop in the crank at the same time. But what I think I want to move on to now is the starter gear assembly. So let me move this out of the way. This is your assembly. This is everything that fires up for the starter to work on this. You have to install a lot of this stuff beforehand. Otherwise, you can't do it afterwards. I'm sorry to say. All right, so what do we have here? Okay, the shaft and everything. This is the crossover shaft, the jack shaft. We have a gear that drops down in here, which is ran by the starter. So let's go ahead and lubricate this. And a little bit right there. Well, that just slides in through the hole here. You can see that. These can be a little bit on the testy side if you don't get them quite lined up properly. There we go. Now this gear goes in there, and it really doesn't matter which way it goes. It just goes down in there and then slides onto the teeth. Boom, there you go. So now what we have is we have this side over here that drives the Bendix. And that drops in right there. And there's a small catch that goes in there to keep that gear from coming off. And we'll lock that in place. One, yep. Sometimes I just like to make sure that these, when I'm using this little torque thing, I like to make sure that it's everything is set in there. So there we go. You cannot put this in with the cases together. It has to be assembled beforehand. Otherwise, you're kind of screwed. It just sits in there, and that's all that does. The starter turns it, and then that turns the Bendix. So we might as well move on to the Bendix while we're at it. It just slides down on there. But I like to put a little pre-lube on this. Now, one thing I like to do with these, especially if it's a used one, even the new ones, I will torque these down a little bit. I like to squeeze these bars together just a little bit. What this does is it gives pressure on this gear so that it actually engages. So this should be fairly tough to move. Alrighty, so there's a little slot down in there, and we want that to fall down in there. But first, a little spring goes down on there. And then this mechanism drops in right there. Now it rides down in that little groove. And we have actual starter gear that drives the whole unit. And what happens here is when this kicks, it literally pushes that, I don't know if you can make that out, it literally pushes this gear down so that it'll drive against the gear on the crank and turn the motor over. But wait, we have more. In order to keep that on there, flat washer that goes on, then 2 half clips that go on, then this little unit here that has a little lip edge that holds the two half clips in place. And then we have the snap ring. But like I said, all this main shaft, this crossover piece, this jack shaft that goes in here, needs to be in there first, or you're kind of screwed. Actually, you can see on this side here what happens. That mechanism, and then your shaft, your crankshaft, that gear, this gear right here, is what this engages on. So when that goes in, that's what engages and spins the engine over, in case you were interested. So we're on this side. We might as well go ahead and do the starter side. Okay, we have the starter side. This drives the Bendix area, the counter shaft. So we put a pin in, move that till it drops down in there. A spacer, because the gear starter drives that. The spacer goes down on there. Let me put a little stuff on it. This will get oil on it, but I always just like to make sure that everything has a little bit of something on it. And then we have a little spring washer that goes on there. All that spring washer does is just hold everything in place. There were two pins when you disassembled this unit that need to be in here that hold everything in alignment. Now, if you don't have these and you didn't see them when you pulled this apart, check your cleaning tub. That'll hold the gasket and everything in place for the cover when it goes on. Alrighty, let me get the gasket and everything, and we'll come right back and put that together. With the locker pins in place, you can put your gasket on. And it just basically holds everything in. It also holds the cap, that cover on in place. So what I want to do here is, here again, apply a little on it. That just pushes down on there just like that. These are 10 millimeter, if you didn't remember. All right, that finishes up the starter mechanism and everything, so we're good to go there. This is all looking good in here. Everything's turning, doing like what they're supposed to do. All right, I guess we'll move on to putting the transmission together. Well, you can see that I've got it back on my backbone stand here. Like I said, it's easier for filming. So what we're going to do is we're going to install the gears for the transmission and the seals at the same time. And here again, I like to apply a little bit of lubricant on these. Now this is the main shaft. This would be the shaft that goes outside and drives the sprocket. One thing you also want to keep in mind too on this, there's a clip ring here. It's on this bearing. Don't lose that, because that's what rides in the case here. So when this goes back, when this goes down on there, it fits into a groove. So we got to line up the forks, and everything should just kind of drop into place, but we don't want it to totally drop in all the way right now. There we go. One moment, please. Just spotted something here. Spring on the seal has been moved. There it goes. Much easier to put these seals and everything in place before you assemble this, because it just, well, it's so much easier. This snap ring too that goes on the counter shaft, and it should, everything just kind of drop into place. There you go. Very important. This is the clutch pushrod seal. Put that darn thing in there. Shove it down in there and get it in and good and tight. It's just so much easier to put these darn things together when put the seals on while it's like this. Trying to drive them on, you can damage them in this way. So that you're at this point, you know, there are pins right indicating, locating pins that are on these bearings surfaces in here, which need to be lined up. So when you're applying this crank, all of this stuff needs to go down. When it goes down in there, you want to make sure that you hit those. Otherwise, you could cause damage to everything. Here again, take your time so that they will drop onto those pins properly. I'm trying to spin these bearings. Okay, those two are good. That one's good. Boom. See how that just kind of dropped in there? Once everything was lined up, it was all set in there. One thing we'd want to put on at this stage, drop your timing chain on. And then what I usually do with that, what I'm going to do here now is I'm placing a little clamp on this timing chain so we don't lose it. Everything is good here. So right now we're going to set this just like this, and we're going to put the case together, the bottom part of the case. Okay, before we put the cases together, what we're going to need to do is that we're going to need to apply some adhesive or sealer to these edges. So you wanted to make sure that this area was as good and clean. Now I do it on the bottom case because there's nothing protruding through it except the guide pins, which you can pull out. I don't know if I can get these out. These are in there pretty good, which you want to make sure, yeah, these are locked in pretty good. But you can get around them. It's not a big deal. So basically what I'm doing is I'm using some of this 1194 sealant. You can use pretty much anything. I don't particularly like silicone, but what you want to do while you're making a mess here, you want to spread this out. So I've made this little spreading tool to help seal everything together. A little bit around this area here. So we want to go through and we want to put a nice thin layer all over this without trying to get it on yourself, which I haven't yet been able to successfully keep from getting something on me. Now, I used to have the little pointy thing that went on the end there, the little nozzle, but over the amount of time that I've used this stuff, it somehow got just removed, and I have no idea where it's at. But you just want to ensure that you get some sealing around these areas. Plus, when we get to, just before we get to assemble this thing, I'm going to show you another little trick that you need to do. Most of the sealant should actually go on the stator side or the sprocket side, because that's the case that is exposed to the outside. And on the clutch side, it's in a sealed compartment, so it's not too critical at that stage to do a lot of sealing around here, but I do anyway, just to help hold the cases and everything together. This is the worst part about, I think, about between cleaning the cases and prepping them, and then now applying the adhesive. Everything gets messy. So before we put these together, what I like to do is I like to place a little bit of sealant right on where the seals touch the case, just a little bit. To me, I think it helps seal this area just a little bit. And this is pretty straightforward. Basically, all you're doing, you're grabbing it, trying to keep your fingers out of the glue. And then, boom, you're down. We know that these guys right here had cappers on. And what I'm doing now is I'm also putting on these copper washers, which help seal the area. And then the rest, get regular nuts and flat washers. One in here, and this is, I keep forgetting about this. I don't know why. Let me turn this sideways here a little bit. Let me get my block. In order to get that nut on, this gear cannot be in place. So we're going to go ahead and once again pull this off. A little pad right there. I'm going to make my life easier here. I'm going to go ahead and pull the Bendix gear completely out. Set it aside. We'll assemble that back in there after everything has been torqued. See, sometimes I forget this stuff, you know. There's a lot. I work on a lot of different motors. I work on a lot of the old Harleys. I work on, right now on the other table over there, we're doing a Kawasaki 1977 that we are saving the frame. So we'll be having a video come out on that one. It is, there we go. All right. So yes, you got to move the Bendix setup, and then we'll get back in. I'll show you how to put that all back together again. Okay, here we go. Let's see what we got going on here. So we're going to start off with one, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and we got to switch over. This little unit I made right here. 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Now we have to roll it over, get the back side, or actual top side. 15, 16, 17, 18. Now I'm going to let that sit a little bit, and then I'm going to come back. I'm going to do the second torque. Okay, round 2. And once again, we're going to let it sit. I always like to let them sit for about 10 minutes or so, maybe even a little longer. Depends if I get distracted or not. Okay, last torque. I did a torque already, the third torque. This is the final torque to let the engine sit for about an hour or so. That way, now this is the final stuff. I'm going to set it at 15 pounds again. Actually 15 and a half for my final set. So we're going to start again with 1, done, 2, done, 3, done, 4, good, 5, and where was, oh, 6, 7, 8. And if you make one of these tools like I've done here, you want to make sure that you set it up this way when you use the torque wrench. You don't want to go out here because it changes the torque ratio. So you basically want to come off 90 degrees from the head. Good. That was 9. Moving on to 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, rotate the engine over, 15, 16, 17, and 18. So you should be good to go now. What we can do now is we can put starter Bendix back in. That blocks, we can get to it. So once again, the Bendix is going to drop in. This little gear here, this little arm slides down in between all of that, right down in there. The outside drive goes in there. Here it goes. Flat washer. The 2 halves. The edge retaining ring. And finally, snap ring. All right. So at this time also, while we're doing stuff, you might as well put in the shifter rod. Throw a little lubricant on this just to make everything work out nicely. This is why, especially when this end goes through the seal. So it slides in there. and down. This is we're going to check the alignment of the shifting arm. So we're going to rotate the drum. And basically what we are looking at here, a little pointer here, we want to make sure that there's equal distance from this little tip to there all around. And that can be adjusted by loosening off this nut, but everything looks super there. Let me get my little measure just for the hell of it. That's a 16th. And that's a 16th. I lucked out there. Sometimes you'll have to adjust it, and that means you got to take the clip off and everything, raise it, take the tab off here. There is a stop tab, and then you can turn the nut, and then this, by turning this one way or the other, will move that arm to where you need it to be. But everything looks good so far. So now what we can do is, while we're in this position, rotate it over, flat washer, and a snap ring that will hold this all together. There we go, locked in place. Also at this time, if you want, install the shift arm protector. Now I know we've torqued this already. We'll slide it up in there. And at 15, okay. Here again, I like to put a little lubricant on that, slide that into place, and that just basically slides in there and drops down in. We grab a couple of the bolts for that. Earlier I did a small video, which will be in this, probably in this series, this episode, of rebuilding the starter, or checking the starter to make sure it was in good condition, and replacing the shaft seal, which is needed if you're going to keep this installed. I always like to replace those seals. It's not a big deal. Plus you get to check out your starter to make sure everything is working great there. Now, I don't know if I mentioned it before, but when you're assembling these things, before you do that, you should go over the threads with a thread cleaner. Go off, clean the threads, maybe clean out the nuts, just to make sure that everything is smooth. So when you do your torquing, everything is perfect. All right, so I'm going to put this one on right now. And since I don't have a metric wrench that big, what I'm using here is 1 1/16 inch for these nuts. So that's just standard. You can interchange back and forth. It's like 11 millimeter is a 7/16, half is a 13 millimeter. 9/16 is close to a 14 millimeter. It all plays in. Okay, we can install the lower sump filter or screen. I've got ready here. Put the screws in, and we'll tighten this down. Doing a cross pattern tightening. And we'll install the drain plug at this time using 1 1/16 inch wrench. Okay, well, that's it for this week's episode of Ranwin Park. We went over a little bit about bearings and everything, and putting new seals in, putting the transmission and crank in the case, and putting them together with a torque and torquing them down. So next week, hopefully we'll be getting into doing the clutch work. What you need to know about the clutch plates, the fibers and the steels, and the two different styles that are out there for these clutches. And we'll also be checking out the stator, the rotor, for what you need to know when to find out whether it's good or bad. Well, I hope this episode was entertaining for you. You learned something and you had fun watching. If you've made it this far, thank you a lot. I really appreciate my subscribers and the people that watch my channel. But please like, share, and subscribe. And don't forget to hit that little ringy-dingy bell and push all so you can get all the latest updates on my episodes. If there's any questions or any comments that you want to do, please put them in the comment section below. I read them all. This is Mr. Miyagi signing off. So have a sweet day, stay safe out there, and don't forget to have some fun. Ciao, or cheers.